Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right in today because we are looking at an absolutely radical paradigm shift. We're going to step completely away from the traditional chemistry-based view of disease, and instead we're looking at biology entirely through the lens of mechanical physics and geometric structures. We're exploring the all-that's-holy cellular pressure model, and honestly, it's going to completely change how you think about the human body, and maybe even how you view the very nature of disease itself. Okay, let's dive into this because this question right here flips everything on its head. Traditionally, we're taught that cancer is this random, chaotic biological mutation. But under the All That's Holy framework, we're looking at something called type 3 cancer, which are liquid blood cancers, as a mechanical malfunction. What if the cell isn't intrinsically evil or broken, but is actually just suffering from a massive, mathematically predictable time lag? To really wrap our heads around this, we need to define type 3 cancer. We're talking about things like leukemias, lymphomas, and myelomas. Unlike solid tumors, which are type 1 and type 2, these liquid cancers don't form a rigid mass. They are zero anchor. When you look through this physical lens, they're the direct result of a relative fluid pressure mismatch that causes cells to just shear right off and become free-floating inside your bloodstream. They aren't caged by external tissue pressure at all. They're adrift. It's kind of like boats whose mooring lines have completely snapped, just drifting aimlessly, instead of staying safely docked at the harbor. And this brilliantly illustrates the foundation of it all. The 13-layer universal physics map from the All That's Holy Cosmic Field Atlas. In this model, every living cell isn't just some random blob of chemistry. It's a complete 13-layer breathing torus. Think of it as a miniature universe with its own expanding and compressing geometric curvature rings. This means that when a cell fails or becomes cancerous, it's absolutely not a biochemical accident. It's a strict geometric and pressure imbalance right here on this exact map. Section 1. The zero anchor drift, when cells lose their friction. So how exactly does a perfectly healthy cell become a liquid cancer? Well, let's look at how a newly forming cell in your bone marrow loses its physical tether to the surrounding tissue in the first place. See, the bone marrow is essentially this highly pressurized liquid factory line. Before a blood cell is allowed to enter the bloodstream, it has to perfectly sync up its internal clock with the environment. But if a patient has abnormal systemic blood pressure, say it's too high, which shears the cell violently, or too low, creating the stagnant swamp, the fluid churn breaks. The cell loses its kinetic drag tension. Because it can't feel the friction of the liquid moving past it, literally like a car skidding on black ice, it completely misses its synchronization window. It fails to drop its physical anchoring hooks, which we call integrins, and just like that, it shears off the tissue grid entirely, drifting endlessly as a free-floating velocity packet. Section 2. The volume time lag. The mathematical bottleneck. Once that cell is unanchored and drifting, we hit the core mechanical consequence of this entire process, and it is a big one. An immediate 27 times internal volume expansion. I really want you to take a second and just look at this number. This represents the massive, explosive swelling this free-floating cell undergoes the second it loses its physical boundaries. Because it has absolutely no anchors limiting its growth, the cell just balloons outward. Now, here's where the geometry gets incredibly fascinating. If a cell's radius triples as it swells, its volume scales cubically, meaning 3 cubed, giving us that massive 27x internal volume expansion. However, the cell's outer membrane, the actual surface area where it receives communication from the body, only scales quadratically. That's 3 squared, or just 9 times. So suddenly, this cell has 27 times more internal fluid space to manage, but only 9 times the surface area interface to receive new commands. It is an immediate, catastrophic, geometric communication bottleneck. To put that in perspective, imagine expanding a giant warehouse to 27 times its original size, but only building 9 tiny receiving doors for the delivery trucks. It just doesn't work. So, the crucial point is that this cell isn't actually broken. It's not intrinsically malicious or evil. It is literally just stuck in a massive time-dilated lag. Because the physical distance from the outer membrane all the way to the nucleus is now so vast, signals take forever to cross that fluid space. The cell is exactly like a lagging computer network that simply cannot download real-time instructions. So what does it do? It simply runs endlessly on the very last set of orders it successfully received before it bloated, which is almost always the worst possible command: grow. Let's move to and see how this builds into an actual mechanical cure. Under the All That's Holy framework, we aren't just poisoning the body with chemical warfare, we are correcting the geometry. We execute a specific 3-step blueprint for supercell inversion: the fluid friction scaffold, the cortical squeeze, and the internal redox overdrive. Step 1. Fluid friction scaffold, re-anchoring the loop. This first step flips traditional thinking entirely because we aren't even attacking the cell itself. We are manipulating the fluid environment right around it. The problem is that the unanchored cell is physically drifting way too fast while its internal clock is running way too slow. By introducing targeted viscous buffers, basically molecular thickeners, into the bloodstream, we artificially increase the local fluid drag. This acts as a literal physical braking mechanism. It forces that unanchored cell to slow its transit speed down, which finally narrows the time dilation gap and allows its lagging internal signals to catch up with the fast-moving body. Step 2. The cortical squeeze, artificial scaffolding specifically for skinny profiles. Now, you might be wondering, what if the patient is incredibly thin? See, obese patients have extra fat to act as a natural buffer, but skinny patients totally lack that physical pavement to squeeze the drifting cells. And standard alternative therapies like intense fasting, absolutely dangerous for them due to critical mass depletion. So, the protocol brings in prednisone. In this specific model, prednisone acts as an artificial boundary buffer. It mimics macro pressure without causing dangerous weight loss for fragile patients. It applies a highly targeted chemical squeeze to stabilize the weak outer membrane and forcefully push that bloated liquid cell right back into a compact, tightly bound configuration. Step 3. Internal redox overdrive, the IV velocity spark. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we handle that final piece of the puzzle, the massive internal time lag. Once we force the cell back into a compact shape, we have to restart its engine. To fix this, the protocol uses a direct intravenous velocity spark of methylene blue paired with specific elements. Because methylene blue so easily crosses fluid barriers, it acts as a direct electron bypass. It literally bypasses that bottlenecked membrane, floods the inner volume of the cell, and instantly speeds up the internal clock. It cranks the cell's processing velocity all the way back up to real time. And the precision required here is just incredible. Notice how boron is mapped here on the All That's Holy elemental chart. This demonstrates how elements are viewed not just as standard chemicals, but as very specific geometric curvature tokens. By applying highly targeted elemental vectors and electron shuttles, we are mathematically forcing the cell to physically drop its asymmetrical strain. We are using pure elemental geometry to patch the leaks and clear the communication lines deep within the cell. The ultimate result of all this, the super cell inversion, transforming sickness into strength. We don't just kill the cancer cell and leave behind a bunch of toxic debris. That's the old way. When you correct the time lag and force the internal density to perfectly match the high-velocity flow of a healthy bloodstream, the cell's own gravity forces it to snap back into a perfect, tight sphere. And because these cells already built up massive structural volume capacities while they were bloated, once their time lock is fixed, they don't just go back to normal. No, they become elite, hyper-efficient super worker nodes. They actively race through the bloodstream, cleaning out systemic trash and shielding the surrounding framework. We literally transform the sickness into a profound systemic strength. It completely changes your perspective, doesn't it? If a cancerous cell is really just a geometric time lag caused by a simple loss of friction, we have to ask ourselves, are we finally ready to stop viewing medicine as indiscriminate chemical warfare and start seeing it as precise, mechanical geometry? It's a pretty provocative thought, but the All That's Holy physics framework makes an incredibly compelling case that the true future of healing isn't destruction at all. It's structural realignment. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it leaves you as fascinated by the mechanics of the human body as I am. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.